Eddy Heck did not believe in miracles. He believed in leverage, interest rates, and the kind of cold, surgical decision-making that had turned his family's modest auto parts business into a real estate empire worth $400 million. By 43, he had bought and sold more buildings than most men had dreamed. He had a penthouse in Manhattan, a lake house in Vermont, and a yacht he used exactly twice a year. He had everything a man could want, except the one thing he could not buy: his daughter's laughter. Welcome to Kindness Arena. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen connections that change lives, please help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. Help me show her that stories like this matter and deserve to be heard by hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, comment your thoughts, where you are watching from, and share it with someone who needs it to stay motivated. Your support keeps these powerful, true stories alive. Not because Sophie didn't laugh. She did, all the time, a bright, wide-open laugh that filled whatever room she was in. But Sophie had been born deaf. Profoundly, irreversibly deaf. The doctors had told him and his wife Rachel in the sterile quiet of a hospital consultation room when Sophie was just 3 days old. The kind of deaf that meant hearing aids would accomplish little. The kind that meant the world of sound, birdsong, music, the whisper of her own name, would forever exist on the other side of an invisible wall. Rachel had wept. Eddy had not. He had simply nodded, thanked the doctor, walked into the hallway, and stood very still for a long time. Then he opened his phone and started making calls. Over the next 8 years, Eddy Heck threw money at Sophie's deafness the same way he threw money at everything else, with precision and aggression. He flew her to the finest audiologists in London, Vienna, and Tokyo. He funded a research chair at Johns Hopkins. He hired a rotating team of the best speech therapists in the country. And Sophie, sharp and determined as her father, became an extraordinary lip reader and a fluent ASL signer by age 6. But cochlear implants, the doctors consistently told him, were not a guaranteed solution for Sophie's particular type of hearing loss. The anatomy of her inner ear was unusual. Surgery carried significant risk of balance damage. Several surgeons had attempted a preliminary procedure and stopped. Each time, Eddy sat in the waiting room, tie loosened, staring at the floor, and each time a doctor walked out shaking their head, something in him calcified a little more. He stopped talking to Rachel about it. He stopped going to Sophie's therapy sessions. He worked harder, traveled more, and told himself that providing the best life money could buy was the same as being present. It wasn't in somewhere deep in his chest, behind the spreadsheets and the conference calls. Eddy Heck knew it. The building on Archer Street was one of Eddy's older acquisitions, a 12-story mixed-use complex in a part of the city that was gentrifying slowly, one coffee shop at a time. He rarely visited personally. But one rainy Tuesday in October, his property manager called in sick, and Eddy found himself there to meet an inspector, standing in the marble lobby with a paper cup of terrible coffee, watching a man mop the floor in long, careful strokes. The janitor was perhaps 60, with close-cropped silver hair, broad shoulders slightly rounded by age, and the kind of unhurried efficiency that comes from decades of physical work. His name tag read, Linus Dre. Eddy noticed him only because he was in the way. He stepped aside with a clipped, "Excuse me," and Linus looked up. "Mr. Heck," Linus said, with a small, easy nod, as though he'd expected him. Eddy paused. "You know who I am? You own the building," Linus said simply. "I've worked here for 11 years. Seen your photo in the office." Eddy grunted and looked back at his phone. But something made him glance up again. On Linus's forearm, just below the rolled sleeve of his uniform, was a tattoo. Not decorative, but functional. It was a hand drawn in clean black lines, fingers arranged in a specific position. The letter D in American Sign Language. Eddy stared at it. "You sign?" he asked, the word coming out before he could stop it. Linus looked at his arm, then back at Eddy. "I learned a long time ago," he said. "My son was deaf. Lost him 7 years ago, car accident. Nothing to do with his hearing, but the language stays with you. Becomes part of how you think." Something shifted in the air between them. Eddy said, carefully, "My daughter is deaf." Linus set the mop against the wall. "I know," he said. "I've seen her. She comes with you sometimes when you do the quarterly walkthroughs. Bright girl. She signed hello to me once, 2 years ago. I signed back, and she nearly knocked you over trying to show you. Eddy remembered that day. He remembered Sophie tugging his sleeve, animated and joyful, pointing at the janitor. He remembered nodding vaguely and steering her toward the elevator. He remembered the way her face had dimmed, just slightly. The memory sat on his sternum like a stone. What did she sign to you? Eddy asked. Linus smiled. She asked me if I liked dogs. I told her I had 3. She told me her father wouldn't let her have one because of the carpet in the penthouse. He tilted his head. She wasn't wrong, was she? Eddy looked away. No, he said. She wasn't. The inspector never showed. Eddy ended up standing in the lobby for 40 minutes. And somewhere in those 40 minutes, the conversation with Linus Dre became something neither of them had planned. Linus talked about his son, Festus, about learning ASL in his 40s, about how awkward and humbling it had been, about the first full conversation they'd had in Sign, sitting in a diner, laughing so hard that other customers stared. He talked about how learning his son's language had not fixed anything. Festus still lived in a world that was often inaccessible, still faced 1,000 daily frictions that hearing people never noticed, but it had built something between them that no amount of money or good intentions could have manufactured. It had built a presence. The hardest thing, Linus said, wasn't learning the signs. It was learning to slow down, to put the phone away, to actually be there in the conversation, because in ASL you can't half listen. You have to look at someone fully. Every time. Eddy said nothing for a long moment. I've paid for every treatment, every therapist, every specialist he started. I know you have, Linus said. He wasn't unkind. He was just honest. And I'm sure Sophie knows that too. But there's a difference between solving a problem and sharing a life. The lobby was very quiet. Rain tapped against the glass doors. Eddy cleared his throat. How long did it take you to get conversational in ASL? Depend what you mean by conversational, Linus said. I could have a basic exchange in 3 months if I'd apply myself fully. It took me 8 months because I was stubborn and embarrassed and kept finding excuses. He paused. You don't seem like the stubborn type. Eddy almost laughed. Almost. I've been called worse. He went home that evening and stood in the doorway of the living room. Sophie was on the floor, cross-legged, her tablet propped against the coffee table, watching a nature documentary with captions scrolling across the bottom. A cheetah was running across a sun-bleached plain. Sophie's eyes were wide. She didn't know he was there. He watched her for a moment. This 8-year-old girl with her mother's dark curls and his own stubborn jaw, wholly absorbed in a world she navigated entirely on her own terms, who had learned to read lips and read people and read rooms with a precision that frankly astonished him. He thought about what Linus had said. You have to look at someone fully. Every time. He sat down on the floor beside her. Sophie startled, then grinned. She signed quickly and fluidly, the way she always did with him, and he caught perhaps 1 word in 5, as he always had. He'd learned maybe 30 signs over 8 years. Functional words. Emergency words. Nothing like a language. Nothing like a conversation. She finished signing something and looked at him expectantly. He pulled up the notes app on his phone and typed, I didn't catch all of that. I'm sorry. I want to learn better. Will you teach me? Sophie read it. She looked at him, that careful, searching look children give adults when they're trying to figure out if something is real. Then she reached over and took his large hand in her small one, and she began, slowly, to show him the alphabet. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in January, Sophie signed something to Eddy across the breakfast table. Long, fluid, specific, the kind of thing she'd have texted a friend. He watched her hands carefully. He missed a few words. He asked her to repeat one phrase, and then, slowly, he signed back. Not perfectly, not even close to perfectly, but enough. Enough for her to understand him, and for him to understand her, and for the two of them to sit across from each other in the winter light with the conversation moving like something alive between their hands. When they finished, Sophie sat back and looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, walked around the table, and hugged him around the neck, the way she used to when she was much smaller, before he had become so busy, so absent, so focused on every problem except the one that mattered. He held on. That afternoon, he called his property management company and told them that Linus Dre's salary was to be doubled, effective immediately. When his manager asked for a reason to put in the file, Eddy thought for a moment. "Put for services rendered," he said. "Significant ones." Then he put the phone away, went back to the living room, and signed to his daughter. "What should we watch?" She signed back, eyes bright, something with dogs. He smiled, a full, open smile, the kind that had been rare on his face for years. "Okay," he signed. "Dogs it is." If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness is never wasted and that even a broken path can lead to beautiful places and change of lives, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Arena, because your support keeps stories like this alive and spreading. Tell us in the comment what you would have done differently if you were CEO. Would you have listened to him? Or has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life in ways you didn't expect? We'd love to hear your story.